Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the Roxy Theater Virtual Cinema today. I'm Jared. I work with the Roxy front of house and office. Welcome Roxy members, family, and friends. We're really happy to have you here for a wonderful conversation with a lot of amazing artists. Before we get to the conversation, I just want to go over some quick housekeeping items. Please visit roxy.com to see our offerings of virtual cinema and screenings. We have so many more events and conversations planned for Roxy members and patrons, so be sure to go there and check those out. Now, if you have any questions for Daniel or Ursula, you can use the YouTube chat box, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. The Q&A will last about 45 minutes. And yeah, so without further ado, I want to welcome our moderator for today, Solomon Adler. Solomon or Zoli Adler is the Lydia and Doug Shortstein Research Fellow in Painting and Sculpture at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. He runs the Godey Tapes record label and House Rules publishing imprint, through which his forthcoming book, Charlie Nothing State of the Ding, will be released next week. The publication explores the life, work, and hermetic philosophies of Charlie Nothing, an eccentric writer and musician who lives in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Welcome, Solomon.
Thanks, Jared.
Yeah. I also want to welcome our filmmaker, Daniel Traub, who directed Ursula Von Rydingsvard into her own. He was the director, producer, and cinematographer who's based in Philadelphia. Daniel's photographs have been exhibited internationally, including solo exhibitions at the Catherine Edelman Gallery in Chicago and Slot Foundation in Philadelphia, and resides in various public and private collections, including that of SFMOMA. His previous documentaries include The Barefoot Artist about Lily Ye and her collaborative artwork in war-torn communities, and Zhu Bing Phoenix about the framed Chinese artist. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you.
Yeah. And finally, Ursula herself. Ursula is one of the leading artists working in monumental sculpture today, and perhaps best known for large-scale sculptures made from beams of set cedar wood. Her art draws from the elemental forms of nature and repetitions of minimalism, creating forms that hover between the organic and the constructed. Examples of her work can be found in major museum collections across the country, including Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and our own SFMOMA. Just as important as her public sculptures that bring art into civic spaces include Ocean Voices 2 at the San Francisco International Airport. Ursula, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and I'll leave the Zoom space for you guys to have your conversation.
Thank you, Jared. First, I'd love to thank Daniel for such a powerful portrayal of Ursula, and Ursula, of course, for a body of work that continues to amaze in new ways, and work that I now understand was often undertaken under very challenging circumstances. Before we launch in, I know that Ursula, you have a few words you'd like to share.
I have sometimes been asked why I make art. It is not a question I find easy to answer with any kind of clarity, but I will try to poke around some possibilities. Why do I make art? Mostly to survive, to ease my high anxiety, to numb myself with the labor and the focus of building my work. Objects, or the process by which I concretize my ideas, feel so good. Because I invariably, especially with my monstrous pieces, run into intense anxiety moments from which I have to unravel myself. Because there's a pleasure in it. Because there's pain in it. Because I endure a hefty load of self-doubt. Because I have confidence in the possibility of seeing this work through. Because I see life is being full of abominations. Because life is full of marvels close to miracles. Because I still don't get who I am. because I will never get who I am. Because my deepest admiration goes to those who have made art that has interested me. Because I want attention from those who make good art. Because I need to use both my body and my mind. The labor of my body is what keeps me awake and alive, what numbs me and offers a kind of a veneer between me and the things in life which are painful to face. Because the visuals, that which I perceive through my eyes, are an extraordinarily important part of my life. Because I don't want to be doing anything else with my life, that the building of my artwork feels like the most consequential thing I could be doing with my time. Because I can run into a world of my making, both physically and mentally. Because I like working with a group of assistants who become another kind of family. Because I like the daily rhythm of going to my studio. Because it's a place to put my pain, my sadness. Because there's a constant hope inside of me that this process will heal me, my family, and the world. Because it helps fight my inertia. Because I like embroidering around my long ago Polish fantasies. Because I can reach into the future with my work. Because I constantly need to try to better understand the immense suffering and pain of my family that I never seem to be able to really understand. And also because I want to get answers to questions for which I know there are no answers.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. And I hope that over the course of our conversation today, we can touch on some of the many things that you just brought up. And I encourage anybody watching to ask questions piqued by some of those really powerful statements. I'd love to just start us out with a couple of questions just to get the ball rolling, and to kind of take it back to some anecdotes. My first question is simply about how this documentary came to be. Ursula, I believe that it was you who first saw Daniel's work. What drew you to his filmmaking?
The film that he did was at SFMOMA, and I'm not usually drawn to sort of short films like that and things that explain the artwork, or I'm not usually drawn to that, but this was moving. And I felt so moved that I looked up Daniel. You know, I spoke to the man that was running the museum, and he told me, you know, that it was Daniel that did it. And I looked him up, and and you know, I told him how pleased, how you know, how really pleased I was with his film. And then we started, I don't think it's right then and there, but I know that I didn't want to let him go after that. So but I think he can better explain the following.
Daniel?
Yeah. Thanks, sir. I didn't know the whole story actually of how you saw it, but that's nice to hear. So after Ursula saw my film at SFMOMA, at the time she was in the process of mounting an exhibition in Venice for the Venice Biennale, and she suggested to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which was the institution that was putting on the exhibit, that maybe they could commission me to make a short film documenting that process. So I was very happy to get the commission, and through that process got to know Ursula, and that was really my first in-depth exposure to her work. and I was very taken with it, and it really kind of resonated with me, and you know, got to know her process and a bit about her history. So all these things made me feel like after I finished this short 10-minute film about Venice, I sort of felt like I wasn't finished yet, that there's somehow more for me to explore. Mm-hmm. So after that film was finished, Ursula, I think we both kind of, you know, got to know each other at that point, and we were both, you know, trying to figure out, well, what's next. And I think around that time, she was also starting work on a commission from Princeton University. And that, when I got to learn more about that, it kind of seemed like it could potentially be a very, a strong piece to kind of form the sort of backbone of a longer documentary, because Ursula herself described it as the most complex and difficult and complex of her career. So in a way, it seemed ideal as a project to kind of dig into and follow the process. So that, and Ursula herself was eager to have that process documented because it was kind of a new direction for her. So all these things, you know, my own interest and we seem to have a good rapport. All these things kind of came together, and I was also looking for a new project to dive into. So that's kind of what got it rolling. And we didn't, you know, it wasn't immediately clear that it would be a long film. At first, I thought maybe it would be a film just documenting that one project. But I think as we started to work together and, you know, I gathered more material and Ursula got to know me better, it just kind of slowly evolved and you know, it became a process that unfolded over 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah. Again, that wasn't planned either, but that's really,
I think that's a perfect segue into my next very pressing question, because it's clear how much labor and effort went into the documentary, and I think that's reflected in your work in a way, Ursula. The documentary does an amazing job of showing us the rhythms and the extremities of your own labor. I love this part where one commentator calls your process medieval. And so I'd love to take us back for a moment to some of your big breakthrough outdoor pieces that Adam Weinberg discusses in the documentary. There's Song of a Saint with the forest of sort of lumpen beams in Buffalo from '79, and St. Martin's Dream with the soaring wing-like forms in Battery Park the following year. Can you take us through some of the sort of hacking and grinding and the aches and pains of making these pieces?
Well, at the time that these two pieces were made, I was very young, very strong, very focused, you know, and this is what I wanted, you know, to do with my life. So I don't think that any of it was dreary or any of it was sort of uninteresting. And I remember when I had this forest of cedar beams that had, you know, something else added to it, and it looked kind of like a forest. That there was somebody that walked by, you know, when I was told that it was time for the piece to go, because they were going to have other people that they were going to commission, you know, and perhaps on that same land. So I was cutting it down with a saw, and somebody took their hands and waved them up in the air and said, "Hey, lady, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm cutting these members, you know." And he said, "You can't do that. The Indians put that up," you know, so that somehow they felt so like so that it belonged to that land. And indeed, you know, there were Indians, not exactly there, but very close, you know. So, you know, and that the process was one, it's near Niagara Falls. Uh, and so we were on a big river, but the land was kind of poisoned by things, you know, all over, because I could see like oil, purpley oil things that you know went through the land. So I chose a piece of land that actually went down and looked a little bit more healthy. But it was very ambitious, very big, and so much fun to do. And I had my German Shepherd. He was huge with me, you know, so that it was just great.
That's so wonderful. Daniel, I think that the documentary, you know, we open up with Ursula at work in her elaborate production uniform, and you close with Ursula at work again. And in between, we explore the toil of farm workers and forced labor in the displaced persons camp, and Ursula's sheer industry raising a child and making work in New York City. Is work and effort and labor, is this a thread for the documentary?
I think for sure. I mean, I think that's what if you follow Ursula around, that's what you see. you see work and you know, a kind of perseverance and you know, just an intense drive to kind of go to the studio every day and produce work. And I think that's what really you know, moved me in a way that I felt like that was the heart of the documentary, to show her process, to show her you know, to try to understand where this this very powerful need to do this physical, you know, very difficult labor, where that comes from. So I think that's kind of what I tried to do. You know, and really, you know, just by being there and trying and being in her studio and following the work. And I think for me also as a visual artist, I learned a lot just by watching how she follows her instincts, how she has a kind of uncompromising I don't know, tenacity or she holds to her conviction of what to do. So that was really instructive for me. But it's also, there's a lot of drama in watching Ursula work, because it all unfolds in the moment. You know, it's not as if she is you know, making happen a plan that she you know set up a while back, or that everything is happening in a moment. She's drawing and then cutting based on those drawings, and all the assistants are responding to what's happening, you know, as each board as each 4x4 gets cut. Yeah. So just the filming process is very exciting, and I ended up filming. That was really the central work of my work of filming her, was just following her work, and then all the other work was kind of the ancillary production that we did, the interviews and then going into Ursula's history. But the process was certainly the core of it.
It's interesting to think about in those terms, the drama of ongoing creative decision making, that's not contained in a certain area of the production, that's just continuously unfolding. Right. And I think that's something that people should know about your work, Ursula, is that, you know, with once each beam is stacked, new decisions are being made about where to cut, how to cut, and that's definitely it must be particularly fascinating watching one of your pieces come to fruition, because every moment there's a new creative element being added.
I think what you're saying is so important right now, in that that there's a way in which I grope the whole time I'm making a piece, that there is no sort of road that I have made in any kind of absolute way. I have to start, I have to have some image of something that I really want when I start a piece, but it rarely ends up being what I wanted. And there is, in time, when I'm through with maybe half of it or something, that it gives you more clues as to what else it wants. But I think the fact that I don't have any pattern, I don't have any model, that I'm working from, that to me would be like a jail. Then it doesn't count anymore, that you're not really squeezing your brain and you're being bored, which is the worst thing. Actually, boredom, I'm on the side of boredom, because I think boredom is also a very important thing in one's life, in order to then go to some places. Like boredom is. And I think that the more techie things that come up, the less boredom you can have. I mean, it's not that it doesn't bore me. It's just something that becomes more of a must, that you can't not do it, because then you miss, a lot, especially during a pandemic, when you really are dependent on these things. So I have real problems with them. But anyway, the raw thinking, of each 4x4, exists. It's not an island in relationship to the one to the left, to the one to the right, to the above and bottom. That they are a real community, but it's a community that really goes places. But I'm putting words onto things because I have to, but that's not really the truth of what I'm saying. It's not a community, but there's a relationship there. And the relationship was not certain, was not planned.
And it must be informed, each time that you do render the curves of one beam, it must inform what you do with the next.
Exactly.
The sculpture is telling you what it needs in a way.
Exactly.
I want to stop here for a moment to just encourage viewers to submit questions. I'm so curious to see or hear what you have to say, think, ask. In the meantime, I have plenty of my own to work from. So Ursula, I'd love to ask you a little bit about your community of assistants. This documentary pays what I think very exceptional attention to all the important contributors in your studio. And I begin to understand your work as a group endeavor under your direction. And when we look at your sculptures, are there ways that we can see or feel this collectivity or this collaborative spirit?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what others see. I just know that I am so grateful. And because I give a lot to them. I am good to them. But they're even better to me, and as I grow older, they find ways of making sure that I don't fall off the scaffolding, you know what I mean? Like that's a little bit better done, because I'm like a third of my life is on scaffolding. Mm-hmm. And I love being there. And they never, ever say to me, geez, Ursula, this could look better if you did that. Like they never suggest that. Like all of the visuals are totally in my control. Nobody else's. But they do so much else. And I know that something like the gluing of all of the cedar pieces that I've done, sometimes, there are like 3,000 pieces that have to be glued. And, and it takes an awful long time because there are many small things, details, that are placed in there. And the cutters, they're the princes of my studio. They're the most brave because to cut the cedar, and honestly, I have made that cedar go through things that it thought it never could go through. I've really sort of managed to keep those surfaces different, all the time, because again, to do boring things, there's no point. There's just it's just like a waste of time. You might as well just build a coffin or so anyway. Yes, that's it.
Sometimes when I look at your pieces, especially the large ones made up of these individual beams that cohere as an individual unit, as a unit, but at the same time declare themselves as these bits, as these kind of notches in a much larger structure.
Yes.
I'm almost reminded of sort of the masonry on Gothic cathedrals or something, where thousands of anonymous hands have come together under the vision of this structure to kind of lend it a coherence. But on each form, you can see the kind of the contours of an individual worker in a way. Daniel?
I think the hand, knowing that the human hand made it is so important. And I think that, I've been living in New York City since 1973. And, the high rises just become worse and worse. And of course, the latest is just the glass and the I-beams, it's like so inhuman. So I don't know, the older buildings, except for some great architects that I know and that I don't know, that are doing really great architecture, that I think that we're killing somehow the humanity by building the kinds of buildings we're building. It's just like, square footage and who can be the highest, and but what about your heart? I mean, why don't they address that? But they don't. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, not at all, not at all. And this is exactly the direction that I was curious about. Returning for just a moment to your team of contributors, Daniel, you take an opportunity in the documentary to show us the team eating lunch, which is clearly a very important ritual for you, Ursula, but an unusual entry in a documentary about art, certainly. So I wonder what your impressions were, Daniel, of this kind of hive of activity.
I think what impressed me was just how dedicated all Ursula's assistants are to her. I mean, they're really, just really, I got the sense that many have been there for decades and have, just feel like Ursula's the mother or the sister, it's kind of like, it feels like a very tight-knit family, and they really seem to be invested in the project of doing this work, as if it's something that's deeply important to them. It's something that they have really put a big part of their life and heart into. So that's really what was very moving to see, I think. And I think you get a sense of that in the lunch, and also how they're all working. I mean, and they're also all independent artists for the most part. So I think they do bring something of their own spirit to the work, but I think they really sense how important Ursula's work is and are willing to give something of themselves to it.
I'm seeing a couple questions here that are mainly directed to you, Ursula. One is about wood, a familiar topic. One of the first things you say in the film, you consider the rough wooden barracks of your camp in Germany, and you mention the comfort of these interiors, but also the difficulty of your experience there. So the question is, what emotions or sensations does wood have for you?
I think that people think that when I build my pieces, that's on my mind, the DP camps, it isn't. It's just, but however, I can't deny that was my childhood, and that a childhood imprints things on your mind that never come off. And it's but when I'm making my work, it's the focus is on making it, and sometimes I get scared because it sometimes is something that I feel is like a monster that's really getting out of hand, but there's always a way out in that you can burn it, if you really don't like it, or if you really think it's hopeless, or you can take it apart as far down as you want, because at first we screw it together, and it's not until we get ready to glue it that we take the screws out layer by layer by layer, and then glue a layer a day. Actually, it takes a whole day because we use resorcinol, and we have great protection, for all of we're very, very safety conscious. So but they were indeed my experiences, that you would like, there was no insulation, there was no in these barracks, there was no paint, and it was just the wood. I don't know. It probably did affect me, but I don't want to unravel it, and sort of, study it and make a philosophy out of it. And my parents were farmers, peasant farmers, for many generations. And I have that blood that runs in my body, and I can't help it. I mean, I neither wanted it or didn't want it, but it's there. And I ended up making something like, I don't know, 31 shovels, but they're all different kinds. They're very sexy, some of them very showy, some of them, big, some of them not so big. So it's somehow it just comes, you don't call it, it sort of calls you. So, but it's great because you get to relive something that was probably consequential to me.
We have another question that's, I think, comes out of a few things you just discussed and we've discussed. Have you, Ursula, ever abandoned a work because of the way it was turning out?
Every 2 years, I have an upstate where the work is stored. Huge Corten steel building that was built very quickly, and it was very reasonable in terms of the funding of it. And I burn about 3 or 4 or 5 of my pieces. I just burn it because there's a lot of land there, and we can keep the fire, in we can control it. So that's and because I couldn't stand looking at them anymore.
Burning was usually, under other circumstances, I would consider burning a very violent gesture, but we're talking about wood here, so it must just seem natural.
Well, this is not something that I've told many people, but when I was maybe, I don't know, 2.5 years old, and the World War II, with the Germans had their border of bombs, that was right in front of where we were. We were in a farm that my father was a laborer for. And when my father saw this, he dug a deep groove in the earth, and then put the children in the groove. The groove maybe was 2 or 3, but we had 6 children by then. Or maybe the baby was so small that the baby went with the mother. So I was in that groove with the earth on top, on the bottom part of my body, and my father then put wooden boards on top of us, so that they couldn't see us. I don't know. It wasn't a very good strategy, it wasn't. And he himself said that later on, but they couldn't see anybody, they couldn't see any children, or from the planes above. I don't know. And then they weren't like right on top of us, but we can see, how beautiful these bombs were. And of course, what the scary part was the sound that they made. And of course, I have claustrophobia as a result of this, experience. But I think that almost reminds me of what we're going through right now. That there's some real overlap. And that's the only thing in my life that I can think of that's a real overlap. That's with this virus.
We have a question from Richard. He asks, I've experienced your work displayed outdoors in very urban settings, as well as in sculpture gardens. Can you talk a little bit about how your work interacts with such diverse environments?
I see the places where my pieces are going to be placed, and I see them well ahead of time. I see them, I have to know where the piece is going, whether it's private or public. And what was the question? Yeah.
I'll rephrase it in my own terms, maybe. How do you, when you're given a site for one of your pieces, what kind of questions do you ask yourself about how that will inform what you make?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I ask myself questions, but it just depends. Sometimes they give me 100 acres, and sometimes, it's a sidewalk. Sometimes it's like at the Barclay Center. It's a huge, walkway that they made there, and it's a building that accommodates, I don't know, 10,000 people or more. So there, it's all so different, and that difference really informs you. It really, as to where the piece might be most potent, in that context.
Mhm.
And it's often very difficult to give your piece that potency, because there's like a five road, like huge amounts of road to one side, and then I I don't know, but I do that instinctively. I follow my instinct on what it says.
You seem so sensitive to the environment that your pieces, in which people encounter your work, as if they kind of frame parts of a landscape or can be seen from different angles and things like that. The documentary does a great job regarding the Princeton installation. You erect this large scale black plastic model version first, I believe.
Yes.
And then you can kind of see from every vantage point what exactly this work will look like. And you get to see the peak of it from the building next door, and you get to see the body of it from this direction.
Right, that's right.
We have another great question coming in, but it's a great question to end on. So I'm gonna ask one more question for each of you, and then end on this question. Daniel, this documentary, from what I understand, went through 20 or 30 edits. Like you told us earlier, it took 5 years. There must be phenomenal footage left on the cutting room floor. If you had more time, is there another part of your adventure with Ursula that you would have loved to include?
Actually, the burning of her work was something I really wanted to film, but for whatever reason, I guess during the process of the film, I think she had just burned a big lot just before I started filming. For whatever reason, that's not something that I was able to film, but that was one regret. I mean, I have no idea if that would have made it into the final film or not, but who knows? But that's really, I think other than that, I've pretty much exhausted every other angle I could have gone through. I mean, I interviewed many more people than who made it into the film. There was a lot of process that I filmed over these years. The reason it took 5 years is not only, partly it's just trying to raise the money to keep it going, but also there was kind of long pauses. But yeah, there was an element of sort of, I would film for a year, and then we do an edit, and then we'd sort of, similar to how Ursula works in a sense. We would kind of respond to what I had done, do an edit, and then kind of do more filming based on what we had. So there was kind of like these layers of work, and then responding to the work until we finally came to the final form.
Sounds a lot like Ursula's creative.
Exactly. In retrospect, it does. I don't know if it was, in responding. I don't know if I adapted that way in response to her work, but I think in a way I also work that way. I work pretty, instinctively rather than mapping things out too clearly ahead of time. Yeah.
I'll finish.
And I'd like to say about Daniel, it was such a pleasure to work with him, to get to know him. He's the only one that asked me the questions, and that over time, like by the time 3 years were passed by, he would even go more deeply, but none of it was aggressive, and he just, took out what he felt I wanted to give. And he was just very, very kind and very psychologically smart.
Yeah. Thank you. I will. I'll end here with one more question from viewers, and they're just curious to know more about upcoming projects by both of you. Maybe we can start with Ursula.
I'm going to have a huge exhibition in Poland in this coming summer.
Great. Wow. All right. Yeah, big project.
Outdoors and inside. And Poland is a beloved country of mine, and I aggrandize it. I make it seem so much more perfect than it really is, because this is what I would have been had it not be for World War II. I'm Polish. I feel like still that I'm Polish. And I think 80% of the names that that my sculptures have are Polish names.
And what about yourself, Daniel?
Before the pandemic hit, I had a couple of films that were kind of in development and starting production, but obviously everything is stopped. So I've actually spent the last few months going back through my photo archives and kind of re-editing some projects. And I lived in China for many years, so I've never really done a book of that work. So I've been putting together some mock-ups of that work.
So exciting. Well, I'll end with one more question for Ursula. Question that I actually like ending with sometimes, which is just, is there anything about your work that you feel gets overlooked? Is there a secret dimension here left unspoken?
I don't want to answer that, because this is the end of something that was sort of all very positive. So I don't really want to answer that. What do you see? Do you see something that was neglected?
Well, in your last response, in the last thing you said about Daniel being so thoughtful and careful and sensitive over the course of making this film, I really got the impression that you continuously opened up further and further as you got to know him, and that things that I didn't know about your work in the past when I was writing came to the fore. This profoundly painful and difficult relationship with your father, the trials that you faced in New York City, even that I wasn't aware of. I'm not necessarily trying to scrape or to poke at deep psychological or personal things, but one gets the sense that there are more layers to be peeled back here. Many
more, but ask Daniel if he's ready for that.
All right. Well, maybe we can leave on a note of mystery then. There's more to be explored.
Well, I could say one thing is that Ursula, as a person, but also in her work, there's some humor that maybe isn't paid attention to so much. I think her work tends to be, so majestic and, grand, just in first glance. But a lot of her work also is, kind of smaller and has a kind of quirkiness that maybe is not so immediately, you don't see at first glance. And there's a kind of, very human, humor.
Thank you for saying that, Daniel.
And Ursula herself, she's very funny. She can be funny.
Well, thank you both for taking time to speak to me today and for taking time with the Roxy Cinema. This has been so kind of informative and so revealing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you. Your questions were all very good.
Oh, well, thank you. This is exactly what I wanted to hear.
You did your homework. I know. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And thank you for everybody who tuned in today and for